Now, as plant lovers, sometimes we get a little carried away with our affection and touch, caress, or even kiss our plants, which I must admit, I've done quite a lot myself. However, many plants actually hate being touched on their leaves, stems, or flowers. In fact, this is something quite understandable because our hands and mouths are, after all, full of many different kinds and types of microbes. Now, since plants are much smarter than us, they don't want to have to fight these microbes on top of their already difficult lives. Moreover, it's not just humans, they also get disturbed when other plants or even inanimate objects touch them. Well, in this way, plants can get sick or catch diseases from other sick plants. That's why they avoid any kind of contact that could make them ill. If plants are forced to touch other plants in the environment where they live, they immediately start taking precautions, thinking that the environment is too crowded. They either extend their flowering period or reduce the size of the parts that touch the other plant or inanimate object. Now, we humans don't have the ability to shrink or enlarge any of our limbs or to decrease our density. But plants can do this. And while doing so, they expend a great deal of energy. Especially repeated touches cause a lot of harm to plants. For example, if you touch your flowers every morning while watering them, or if your plant is in your way, try not to touch it anymore. Because just 30 minutes after this contact, the plant undergoes a major change and uses up all its energy for this transformation. In fact, some plant lovers even send me messages. They think they're doing their plants a favor by helping their leaves open. But these kinds of touches actually harm the plant a lot. Because plants can't run away or thinking that something bad is about to happen to them, they immediately activate their threat response system. This system, which is very similar to the immune system in humans, causes the plant to wear out prematurely and even age early when it is triggered. Now, even if we don't notice it, plants are actually very intelligent because they only enjoy being touched by the wind. If you want your plant to be healthier, instead of kissing or smelling them, you can simply mimic the wind by gently shaking them. The wind encourages them to grow more roots and to bloom. Of course, you shouldn't repeat this movement constantly as it can cause the plant to become stunted because when spring comes, opening the windows to let a breeze in makes the plants happier and triggers them to bud. However, if you arrange the plants you grow indoors tightly together on the same coffee table or desk, the plants perceive the environment as very inadequate, and as a result, they either grow more slowly, produce fewer leaves, or do not extend their stems sufficiently. Because plants really hate even being touched by other plants, and for this reason, they can even change their flowering time. If you are doing everything right for your plant, but it still refuses to bloom, it is probably because its leaves are touching other plants or the wall. Or maybe when you or children around pass by, you end up touching the leaves of the plant. Now, plants are extremely sensitive, and almost everything around them can cause them to become stressed very quickly. In fact, animals around them like cats, dogs, or if your flowers or plants are outside, and there are other types of animals roaming around, or construction machinery working outside, or even a constantly running television inside the house, all of these things create mechanical stress for plants. Now, when a plant experiences mechanical stress, it immediately stops growing and tries to adapt to the new situation. Sometimes, to prevent plants from drooping, we support them with sticks placed in their pots. In fact, even this wears them out. Pruning, removing dead flowers, or picking off wilted leaves, these actions, which many plant lovers routinely do, actually put plants under mechanical stress. I always say, please don't cut off the yellowing leaves, never prune your plants. Now, a plant that is subjected to this kind of mechanical stress not only changes the size of its leaves, but also begins a process of adapting to the worst conditions by adjusting the ions in its cells so that it can survive even in dry soil. This process causes the plant to age much faster and die earlier. In other words, those mechanical actions you perform cause the plant to experience mechanical stress, and as a result, the plant ages faster and dies sooner. Now, plants are very stubborn. I don't know if you've noticed, but thanks to their tireless and persistent repetition of certain behaviors, they've managed to survive for a much longer time, and if necessary, they don't hesitate to commit suicide either. Suicide is extremely common among plants. If you touch your plant's leaves too much, or if other objects touch the leaves, the plant can actually change its own genes. In other words, it can grow by extending itself in a different way. Sometimes we see a tree growing alone on the edge of a very high mountain, stretching out toward the cliff. Well, this tree has undergone a transformation as a result of mechanical stress. Again, while a plant under extreme stress sometimes responds gradually, in some cases it gives a response called a nastic movement. For example, there are flowers that bloom at night. There are also certain reactions like the leaves of some plants opening during the day and closing at night. These are the nastic movements of the plant. Now, plants also experience great stress during extreme heat. Again, the intensity of heat waves and the general increase in global temperatures, all of these are factors that put plants under stress. That's why you shouldn't touch your plant's leaves, prune them, cut them, or break them off.